Hello again, second grade. Are you ready for the next chapter in Wayside School is Falling Down? We are in chapter 28 now. It is called Valush. And this is actually a pretty fun chapter. We only have a couple more chapters left before the end of the book. Remember, it's only 30 chapters. So sit back, relax, and I hope you enjoy this one. Mrs. Jules rang her cowbell. "I have some wonderful news," she said. The children stopped what they were doing and looked up. They waited for Mrs. Jules to tell them the wonderful news. She said, "You are a very lucky class indeed. Mrs. Walush, the world-famous dancer, will be coming here to Wayside School. She will teach you how to dance." Everyone was still waiting for the wonderful part. "Isn't that exciting? You will see her every Wednesday instead of going to PE. Will girls have to dance with boys?" asked Jenny. "Well, I suppose." "Gross," said Leslie.
"Yuck,"
said Dana. Then Ron asked,
"Will boys have to dance with girls?"
"Well, obviously." "No way. We'd rather dance with a dead rat," said Eric Fry and Terrence. Everybody started talking at once about cooties and warts and other horrible diseases you get from touching girls or boys. Mrs. Jules rang her cowbell again and told them all to settle down. "Mrs. Jules, I don't need to take dance lessons. I already know how to dance," said Eric Bacon. "Yes, Eric, I've seen you dance," said Mrs. Jules sarcastically. Eric Bacon was a great break dancer, but break dancing was no longer allowed at Wayside School. That was because every time Eric danced, he broke something. "Mrs. Walush will teach you the grace and beauty of classical ballroom dancing," said Mrs. Jules. Everybody groaned. On Wednesday, they all headed down to their first dancing lesson, except Myron. Myron went to PE.
"How come Myron never has to do anything?"
asked Jason, and Calvin replied, "I don't know. I've been wondering that too." Then Bebe said,
"Myron's father must be friends with the president. I think Myron gave Mr. Kidswatter $1,000.
said Todd, and Jenny said,
"No, I bet you he's blackmailing Mrs. Jules." "How could he do that?" "Maybe Mrs. Jules got crazy, and she danced on top of her desk with a lampshade on her head, and Myron took her picture. And so now Mrs. Jules has to let Myron do anything he wants, or else he'll show the picture to Mr. Kidswatter."
"Huh, makes sense," said Mac. But then Todd asked, "But if she had a lampshade on her head, how would Mr. Kidswatter know it was Mrs. Jules?" No one knew how to answer that. Just then, they entered the room on the second floor. Mrs. Walush, a strange-looking woman with bright red hair, said,
"Welcome. My name is Miss Walush. It's so wonderful to be here at Wayside School."
She wore pink tights and a sparkling pink top.
"I hope we will be friends, yes?"
Nobody said a word. All around were red and green balls. There was also one yellow ball. This was the room where Louis kept the balls for lunch and recess. It was also the room that always was used for school dances. It was the ballroom.
"So, who will be first?"
exclaimed Mrs. Walush. Everyone tried to hide behind someone else. Mrs. Walush put her hands on Ron's face.
"What is your name?"
she asked. Ron squeaked.
Ronaldo, king of the gypsies.
I don't know how to dance.
Dance? We are not going to dance.
We're not?
No, Ronaldo. We are going to tango.
She put her left arm around Ron's waist. Then she grabbed his left hand with her right and stuck it way out in front of them. Suddenly, the music started. Mrs. Walush dragged poor Ron across the room as she stomped her feet in time to the music. Dump, 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 da rump da 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 rum bum dump, 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 rump da 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 rum bum dump, 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 dump.
Hey!
When she yelled hey, she threw Ron up in the air and clapped her hands. Ron turned a somersault in mid-air. Then Mrs. Walush caught him. They tangled back to where they started. Ron's eyes were spinning in the opposite direction. "Hey, that looked like fun! Do me!" said Mauricia.
Very well,
said Mrs. Walush. She grabbed Mauricia and tangled with her across the room. Dum, da-da-ra-rump, da-da-da-da-ra.
Hey!
She threw Mauricia up in the air and clapped her hands. Mauricia turned a double somersault before Mrs. Walush caught her. They tangled back to the front. "My turn," said Terence. As Mrs. Walush tangled with Terence, the other kids stamped their feet along with Mrs. Walush. They all yelled, "Hey!" at the same time and clapped their hands. One by one, Mrs. Walush tangled with every kid in the class. The other kids danced with each other. Boys danced with girls, and girls danced with boys. They didn't care. Paul danced with Leslie, Dana danced with John, Terence danced with Rondi, Allison danced with Jason, DJ danced with Kathy, and Todd danced with Joy. "Hey!" they all shouted together. Of course, they weren't strong enough to throw each other up in the air. Instead, they tried to trip each other and throw each other to the ground. "Hey!" Even Kathy was having fun. "Hey!" she shouted as she kicked DJ in the rear end. They also threw balls at each other. "Hey!" Mrs. Walush began to get tired. Sometimes she didn't catch the children after she tossed them in the air. Dee Dee crashed to the floor.
Wow! This is more fun than Murder the Man with the Ball! Hey!
At last, the music stopped. Dump, 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 da-da-da-da-rump. And everyone yelled, "Hey!" one last time. Mrs. Walush clapped her hands.
Wonderful! Fantastic!
They all staggered out of the ballroom, cut up, bruised, and bleeding. Mrs. Walush called after them.
Next week, we waltz.
"So, how did everyone like dancing?" Mrs. Jules asked when they returned.
Dance?
Asked Ronaldo, king of the gypsies.
We did not dance.
"You didn't?"
No, we tangoed.
Everyone cheered.
"It was wonderful!"
exclaimed Kathy. "Fantastic!" said Terence. Myron was sorry he had missed it. "I can't wait till next Wednesday," said Todd. The end. I hope you guys enjoyed that chapter. See you next time.